Welcome back to Ontario Cold Cases, Canada's true crime podcast. I'm Jay Nickel of Nickel Investigations, and you're listening to another Whodunit Wednesday and a brand new episode of Mick and Mack Mysteries, the series where we step back in time to the smoky streets and shadowy corners of post-war Toronto. Tonight's story takes us deep into the haunted heart of Algonquin Park. A modern-day artist is found dead in Canoe Lake, his final days echoing those of Tom Thomson, the legendary Canadian painter whose 1917 death remains one of the nation's most enduring mysteries. But when detectives Mick and McCathie and MacNeely arrive, they discover this is more than a case of history repeating itself. Ghostly figures, shifting canvases, secrets buried beneath the water, and the chilling question, did the past just come back to finish the painting? This is the Canoe of Shadows, a Mick and Mack mystery. Chapter 1. The Artist's Last Stroke. The first thing Mick noticed wasn't the stillness of the lake. It was the way the mist clung to the trees, like it didn't want to leave. Canoe Lake stretched before them in a rippling hush, the only sound the dip of oars from the park ranger's canoe. Mick and Mack sat across from Ranger Elsie Corbin, a wiry woman with wind-chapped cheeks and an expression like carved granite. She didn't speak much. She didn't need to. They reached the dock just as the coroner's team zipped the body bag shut. Name was Peter Lantry, Elsie said, nodding to the stretcher. Local artist. Lived up in one of the old cabins near T Lake Dam. Came up every summer to paint. This time, he didn't leave. Mick adjusted his brown fedora and looked toward the lake, where a battered green canoe had been found floating upside down that morning, eerily similar to the way Tom Thomson's had been over 3 decades ago. No signs of trauma, Mac asked, glancing at the coroner. None obvious, said Dr. Kendall, the ever-droll Toronto pathologist who had made the trip up. He poured from a battered thermos. Unless you count dying in the exact same place as Tom Thomson as trauma. Not funny, Elsie said, not turning her head. Kendall shrugged. History repeats itself, sometimes with a brushstroke. As they walked up the trail to Lantry's cabin, Mick took in the environment. The jack pines twisted like dancers frozen mid-step. A crow cried once sharply, then fell silent. Inside the cabin, the smell of linseed oil and damp wood mingled with something colder, unseen but felt. Easels stood in corners. A freshly finished canvas leaned against the far wall. It was unmistakably Lantry's work, bold, expressive, echoing Thomson's style. But as Mick stepped closer, a chill ran up his spine. Mac joined him and let out a low whistle. In the background of the painted forest behind the trees, just barely visible, were figures. Shadowy, faceless, watching. Chapter 2. Echoes of the Past. You're saying you painted that last week? Mick asked, staring at the canvas again. The shadows in the trees seemed to shift slightly when he looked away. It was the trick of the light, he told himself. Probably. Ranger Elsie nodded. He brought it down to the park office 3 days ago. Said it was done. He didn't look right, like he hadn't slept. Muttered something about seeing the jack pine for what it really was. Meaning what exactly? Mac asked, ducking slightly to fit through the cabin's low doorframe. Elsie shrugged. You meet enough artists out here, you learn not to ask. They spent the rest of the morning combing through Lantry's cabin. Brushes still damp in their jars. A half-written letter in a notebook. It's not just memory in these woods. It's something older. Watching, following. Like he said. Like Tom said. Tom who? Mac muttered. Thomson, Mick replied. The ghost in the room. Outside, the sun peeked through the pine needles, sending slanted light across the lake. The wind picked up, just enough to ripple the surface and rattle the trees. Mick felt a prickle on the back of his neck. "Do you hear that?" he asked. "Hear what?" "Voices," Mick said, squinting into the trees. "Whispering." Mac gave him a look. "Mick, it's the wind. And the smell of wet oil paint's going to your head." Before Mick could reply, a new voice called from the path. "Detectives?" An older man approached, bundled in a wool coat despite the warming day. He moved with a careful balance as someone who had once been sure-footed, now slow by time. His face was craggy and familiar, because his paintings had once hung beside Thomson's. "Name's Harris," he said. "Lawren Harris." Mick's eyebrows lifted. "Of the group of 7? "What's left of it," Harris said grimly. "I heard about Peter. Thought you might need someone who's seen this before." Mac folded his arms. "Seen what before?" Harris looked out at the lake, his voice lower now. "Something moves in these woods. Has for years. Maybe it's grief, maybe it's guilt. But I'll tell you this. Tom wasn't mad, no matter what they said. He saw something, and I think Peter Lantry saw it too." Chapter 3. The Haunting Canvas. They stayed the night in the ranger cabin. Log walls, flickering kerosene lamp, and a wood stove that coughed more than it warmed. Elsie gave them blankets, coffee, and a warning. "If you hear anything out there tonight," she said, "don't follow it. Sound travels fine in these parts. Not everything that calls your name is something you want to meet." "Cheery place," Mac muttered, plopping onto the bunk. "Reminds me why we're not back in Toronto chasing bookies and dames." "'Cause none of them ever painted ghosts into a jackpine," Mick said, setting the canvas upright across the room. He wanted to study it by lamplight. It was still there, those figures in the trees. But something was different. Mick blinked, moved closer. In the lower corner, where there had been nothing but brushstrokes the night before, there was now a faint outline. The shape of a canoe. Empty. He looked again. Still there. "You seeing this?" he asked. Mac grunted. "I'm seeing my breath, which is odd considering it's June." The temperature had dropped. The air had gone still. Outside, the night pressed close against the windows, and the lake was eerily silent. Then came the scratching. Mick turned. The brushes in the jar were quivering. One slid upright slowly, then another. The third began to move in short, deliberate strokes across a blank canvas. Mac jumped to his feet. "Okay, nope, no sir." The strokes were formed in the shape of a tree, a single pine bent just so. Then just as suddenly the brush clattered to the floor. Mick exhaled. "I think it's trying to show us something." Before Mac could protest, there was a knock at the door. Ranger Elsie stood there pale. "You'd better come quick, there's someone by the lake." They followed her into the dark, flashlight slicing through the mist. At the shore, near where Lantry had been found, stood a man in a wide-brimmed hat and old-fashioned clothes, facing the water. He didn't move, didn't speak. "Sir?" Elsie called out. The man turned. No face, just shadow under the brim. And then he vanished, gone between one blink and the next, leaving only footprints that ended at the shoreline. Max swore under his breath. Mick's voice was low. "I think we just saw Tom Thomson." Chapter 4. The Unseen Brushstroke. By morning, the mist had burned off the lake, but not the questions. The shoreline looked innocent again. Pine needles underfoot, loons calling in the distance. But the moon in the ranger cabin was taut as canvas before the first stroke. Mac poured coffee and stared at the empty spot where the ghostly figure had stood. "I don't like ghosts that leave footprints," he muttered. "It gives them too much traction." Mick was already rifling through the late Peter Lantry sketchbooks, piled in the satchel retrieved from the cabin. Most were landscapes, pines, rivers, the curve of a beaver dam. Then came a change. The strokes grew darker, angled, faces hidden behind tree trunks, a pair of eyes in the water, and finally, an unmistakable figure in a canoe, hunched forward, as if paddling away from something behind him. Tucked in the back was a brittle envelope labeled, "Found in the old post box at T Lake, Summer 17. Inside, a half-burned letter in faded graphite, the signature almost erased. TT. They think I don't know, but I see him, always watching. When I paint, he's there in the reflection. When I sleep, he whispers. The lake holds more than water. It remembers, and it wants me to remember too." "Tom Thomson," Mick murmured. "This was never sent." Mac frowned. So Lantry finds it decades later and suddenly starts painting like a man possessed? He took the letter to Lawren Harris, who sat on a sun-bleached bench by the ranger's dock, sketching the shoreline from memory. He read it in silence. When he looked up, his eyes were distanced. "Tom told me once that the woods were never still. But painting them wasn't capturing a moment. It was catching something alive, like fishing for ghosts." "You ever believe him?" Mac asked. Harris folded the letter carefully. "I never stopped." They spoke to others, older guides, retired painters who once drank with a group of 7. The stories were always the same. Tom's final days had been troubled. He believed someone was watching him, following him. Some chalked it up to paranoia. Others whispered darker theories. One old park worker, blind in one eye and half deaf, leaned close to Mac and said, "They found Tom with a bruise in his temple, you know. Said it was a fall. Ever seen a man fall in a straight line, arms still at his sides?" Mick and Mack exchanged a look. Then came word from Elsie. A local diver had something for them. Beneath Canoe Lake, something had been found wedged between rocks near where Lantry's canoe had turned up. Mick and Mack followed the diver out onto the water. The diver surfaced, coughing from the cold, and handed up a waterlogged bundle, wrapped in oilcloth and wire. Inside, a second painting, older, in the Thomson style. But the paint had run and smeared as if it had been submerged for years. Still visible, a canoe with 2 figures, one paddling, the other slumped in the bow, dead. Chapter 5. The Lake Secrets. The old canvas lay dry in the ranger cabin, warped and water-stained, but still powerful. Mick stared at it for a long time. "One of them's Tom," he said. "But who's the other?" Mac knelt beside the oilcloth wrap. "Look here. Wire. Rusted, but not from an easel. This was tied shut. Someone wanted this painted to disappear." Elsie returned, her face pale. "That diver, Scott, he's done these wires for years. Says he's never seen anything like what's down there. Claims there's a ledge, natural rock shelf with all sorts of junk caught in it. Brushes, a boot, a rusted badge, old fishing gear, maybe from the 1910s. She hesitated. And a paddle, split down the middle like it hit something hard. Later that afternoon, with the diver guiding them, Mick and Mack suited up in borrowed gear and went down. The lake grew colder as they descended, darker with every meter. At the ledge, time seemed suspended. There was a sense of reverence in the water, an eerie stillness broken only by the swirl of silt and the soft creak of gear. Mick's light passed over a cracked artist box. Its initials warned almost nothing. TT. Then something drifted into view. A shape, pale, human, floating just beyond reach. It turned slightly, then vanished in the gloom. Mick surfaced first, breathing hard. There was something down there. Mac spot water. Yeah, a reason I hate lakes. Back on shore, they laid out what they'd found. Among it, a small leather notebook sealed with oilskin and wax. Crumbled slightly in their hands, but revealed pages still legible. Tom Thomson's sketch diary. The final entries were erratic. I saw him again. Not the man. No, not anymore. A shadow. Eyes like wet coal. He wants a canoe. Wants what I painted. I buried the sketch, burned the canvas, but I don't think it matters now. Peter will find it. If he does, tell him I'm sorry. Peter, Mick said loud. Peter Lantry? That's impossible. Not unless there's more to Peter than we thought, Mac muttered. Back at Lantry's cabin, they found a locked trunk beneath the floorboards. Inside, letters addressed to Peter from his grandfather. Names scrawled across the oldest envelope in faded ink. George Lantry. A timber scout. One of the last to see Tom Thomson alive. And the man Thomson was rumored to have argued with in town the week before he vanished. Mick looked up. Peter wasn't as obsessed with Thomson. He was trying to solve the mystery himself. Mac finished the thought. And somebody didn't want him to. Chapter 6. The Art of Vengeance. The storm hit just after dusk. Rain slashed Canoe Lake like a palette knife. Thunder rolled over the forest as if the land itself had decided to speak. Mick and Mack stood beneath the ranger station's overhang, going through the trunk of George Lantry's letters by flickering lantern light. One note stood out, dated July 1917, 3 days before Tom Thomson was last seen. Tom won't let it go. Keeps asking questions. Keeps painting what he shouldn't. He doesn't understand this place or what he stumbled into. I told him to stay out of the north end. If he doesn't, I won't be responsible for what happens. It's not a warning, Mick said. That's a threat dressed in flannel. Mac ran a hand through his hair, already soaked from the downpour. So George Lantry threatened Thomson. And Peter finds out. Maybe even finds the same letters, starts painting like Tom, starts poking around. And someone decides history should repeat itself. They didn't have to wait long for the suspect to come to them. Her name was Eleanor Hargrave, a visiting art historian and part-time gallery consultant who'd been working with Lantry on a retrospective. She claimed to be writing a book. As Elsie quietly confirmed, she'd also been nosing around restricted park files, requesting access to George Lantry's old cabin site. Too much interest. Too many questions. When they confronted her at the ranger office, she didn't flinch. Think I killed him, she said calmly, closing her umbrella. How flattering. Your grandfather was Edwin Hargrave, Mick said. Lantry's timber rival. Another man who fought with Thomson over development permits and backwoods surveying. That ring a bell? She smiled faintly. My grandfather died bankrupt. His name's a footnote. Tom Thomson? He's immortal. Because he painted trees instead of chopping them down. You were helping Peter recreate the past, Mac said. When we got too close to the truth, you decided to finish the painting yourself. I think I pushed him in, Eleanor said. Please. Peter slipped. He was emotional, erratic. You watched him die, Mick said, voice steady. Her smile vanished. You think ghosts speak through trees, she whispered. You've seen the canvas. You know they never stopped watching. She lunged suddenly, reaching for a drawer. Mac was faster, grabbing her wrist and slamming the drawer shut. Inside a canvas knife, not sharp enough to kill, but plenty sharp to send a message. Eleanor froze. Mick stepped closer. Use the myth of Thomson to cover your crime. Because the lake forgives murder, if it looks like a mystery. Rain pounded harder. Somewhere outside, a loon wailed. As they let her out, lightning lit up the shoreline. and on the water just for a second, a canoe. Empty. Then it was gone. Chapter 7. The Painter's Peace. The rain passed before midnight, leaving a hush across Canoe Lake like a breath held too long. Mick and Mack paddled slowly through the mist, the borrowed canoe gliding between spans of jack pine. Their lantern cast golden ripples on the black water. She confessed to the cover-up, Mick said. Said she didn't kill Peter, but she watched him fall. Said the canoe tipped in the storm and he struck his head. And she left him, Mack muttered. Didn't even try to help. She didn't have to kill him, Mack said quietly. The ghost took care of the rest. They reached a small pine-covered island near the north end, where Peter had been seen sketching in his final days. According to the ranger logs, Tom Thomson had once camped here too. At the center was a weathered cedar post, no markings, just a faded blue band painted around its top. Old-timers said it had been there forever. Mick placed Peter's final canvas at its base, wrapped in oilskin. Think it'll stay dry, Mack asked. Mick nodded. It's not for the world to see. It's for him. They stood in silence for a while. Then a breeze lifted across the lake. The mist began to rise. And from the trees came the faintest sound of a paddle, steady, slow, parting the water like breath through lips. They turned. Across the lake, far off but clear, a canoe glided between the trees. In it, a figure in a dark coat and broad-brimmed hat. This time there was no fear, only stillness and peace. The figure gave a single nod, then vanished into the trees. Epilogue. The final canvas. They left Algonquin the next morning as the sun broke through the clouds, turning the lake to gold. Back in Toronto, Dr. Kendall's final report listed the cause of death as drowning due to blunt force trauma, likely from a fall. But the real story, Mick thought, would never fit on a line in a report. It lived in the trees, in the brushstrokes, in the water. Back at the precinct, Max stretched, groaning. Next time, remind me to pack socks that don't smell like dead pine squirrel. You said you like nature. I like nature in paintings, not in my boots. Mick chuckled, tapping the frame of a print in his office wall. The jack pine. He looked at it a moment longer than usual. The tree was still there. But for just a second, he could have sworn there was a canoe in the distance. And two figures. One paddling, one watching. Forever part of the landscape. The end. Thank you for listening. This has been Jay Nickel of Nickel Investigations and Ontario Cold Cases, Canada's True Crime Podcast, and an episode of the Mick and Mack Mysteries.